Dear friends, now we will start. Thomas, я могу начинать, да? Dear friends, good morning. As you can see, during these years, Ukrainian traditional breakfast became the most popular event during World Economic Forum in Davos, and I'm so happy that we have so many friends of Ukraine now in this room. Yeah, thank you very much. Dear friends, Ukraine's main tasks are reforms and to defend against aggression. But there is one more thing: overcome stereotypes, build a strong narrative on Ukraine. Those who have not visited Ukraine are sometimes ready to believe the most outrageous, excuse me, bullshit. Yeah, sorry for that. Conspiracy theories, dark, dirty, suspicious. Almost everyone who was in Ukraine loves Ukraine, but many have not yet been to Ukraine. Experts agree. On reforms and defending against aggression, Ukrainian leadership does a not at all bad job. The narrative is also crucial. We must be everywhere, show simply the truth. It's not all white, but much whiter than the stereotypes. In Davos here, we make good steps. I'm happy that to our traditional event of 15 years, great international friends of Ukraine come together. Prime Minister Honcharuk will speak on his plans to transform Ukraine, and young politicians and activists are here. I believe they will change Ukraine. They meet great people in Davos, learn and show Ukrainians' bright face to the world. Looks like this is a day of global activity on Ukrainians' narrative. On many fronts, with a strong story about modern Ukraine. And don't think that our president is not active today. He is not only in Israel at the World Holocaust Forum, he also gave us a message for you, participants of the World Economic Forum. Please watch.
Шановні пані та панове, в момент, коли ви дивитесь...
Dear ladies and gentlemen, as you're watching this video, I will be in Israel, but I wanted to congratulate all of the participants attending the Davos breakfast. I know that this year Ukraine enjoys special attention from our global partners. As we have had a complete renewal of our administration, here are a few messages we would like to convey to the world. Ukraine has everything that's required to be a prosperous and successful country: favorable climatic conditions, an advantageous geographic location, and incredibly talented people. And the only thing we lack is investment. Ukraine is one of the few countries that enable investors to earn such a high level of return on their invested capital. We have a new government with a radically different mindset and a completely different attitude to investors. And we have some interesting offers. This investment nanny, for those who invest more than $100 million, we conclude a direct investment agreement with the state based on English law. These investors will receive a personal guardian from the government nanny. Our guardian will speak 5 languages and will address all of your questions 24 hours, 7 days a week. Our second offer, invest now. We will provide investors who privatize state-owned enterprises worth $10 million or more in the next 2 years. We will provide with a 5-year tax holiday. We also are implementing a rapid return of investment in modernization from 2 to 5 years instead of 10 and 15. And for the sake of guaranteed protection of the rights, we will create the International Arbitrary Court in Ukraine. We create single rules of game for everyone. We are digitizing processes and decreasing the role of the government where it's not needed. Not to invest in Ukraine is akin to being George Bell, who in 1999 refused to buy Google for $1 million. Thank you.
Frankly speaking, for me sounds very attractive. Maybe I also should invest something to this beautiful country, to Ukraine. I think it's a great idea. But now we will start our discussion, Ukraine 2020, new reality, new narrative, new challenges. And Fareed Zakaria, please, floor is yours. Thank you very much, dear friends.
I thought he was going to announce the investigation into Biden. I guess that didn't happen, which would have annoyed me because, remember, it was meant to be on my show. No, it's a great pleasure to be here, great honor. Before Donald Trump made Ukraine world famous, Victor Pinchuk made Ukraine world famous. So I want to begin by thanking him for, as always, this extraordinary event. We will start with some remarks by the new Prime Minister of Ukraine. All the new government of Ukraine, you will notice, will make most of you feel very old because they're all very young. Oleksiy Honcharuk will speak for a few minutes, then take a few questions, and then we will move to a panel. We have a terrific morning for you. Thank you all for coming. Mr. Prime Minister.
Morning, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, all early birds who choose the Ukrainian menu for this breakfast. I want to thank you, you to choose, you to decide to gather with us in this wonderful place. And of course, I want to thank you to Mr. Pinchuk and to all people who organized this great event, this breakfast, Ukrainian breakfast. It's a very good tradition with a very huge impact for Ukraine. It's very important that the so high-level friends with so deep senses gather together every year to exchange their energy and to invest it into our country. I know also that there are a lot of such early birds in Ukraine. They are watching us with a live stream, so if you allow me, I'll switch into my native tongue in Ukrainian to be understandable for all Ukrainian people.
And this is my first speech at such a highly respected forum. In the first speech as the Prime Minister, I'm happy that the President has already said what I was planning to say for investors. But in fact, I believe that today is the best time to invest into our country, and there are many reasons for that. First and main reason, now Ukraine is the most attractive economy that's developing, and it's most attractive for investments. We have the youngest president, the youngest government and parliament, the new generation in power in this country. We are transforming the country as fast as it is possible. We didn't monopolize energy sector and infrastructural sector. We're changing the system of education and the system of healthcare, attracting investments there and providing for private investors the possibility to work as just like state-owned institutions. Unfortunately, sometimes old post-Soviet institutions, this work is based on macroeconomic stability. If you look at figures, at objective figures, and they don't lie, then today we're growing, our economy is growing faster than the world on average. We have the record-setting gold reserves of the National Bank. We have, our hryvnia has started to get stronger, and that means that the trust is back to our state. And this is, of course, just the beginning. And I remember as Mr. President Kwasniewski used to say Ukraine has to do its homework very well. We understand that, and within the last 6 months, a lot has been done. We completed, together with our colleagues, the unbundling of the Naftogaz, one of the most important companies in Ukraine, that allowed us to ensure for the next 5 years energy security, not just for our country, but for the whole Eastern Europe. We passed the law on concessions, and this week we have the first winner of our first port. Next week we'll have another one. We gave more than 500 companies for privatization. We renewed the management of the tax service of State Property Fund, and we do everything so that the investor this year feels comfortable. But this is not enough. We need the rule of law. We need to really fight corruption. In the government today, there's no corruption at the highest level. We are a big country, of course, and that's why we still have to fight corruption at different levels. We need to simplify the processes, to digitize our procedures, to cancel unneeded regulations, to work and to teach our people. And that is why, understanding that this will require time and investors need comfort today, that is why we offer this individual approach, investment nanny, not because we think that we need to babysit with our investors, but we want our investor to feel important, to feel care from the state just now. And that is not just about investors who will come, but the business which now is working in our country. Yesterday it was a very good day for Ukraine. We met with our friends from the IMF. Yesterday, the MOU was signed between the Ministry of Infrastructure and Deutsche Bahn. Yes, we want to give to Germans our railway for 10 years for management. And we believe that this important decision will affect not just the infrastructure, this infrastructural unit. This will show that Ukraine is open for investments for the world, open to new standards. I believe, of course, we need to agree on details. The official documents are to be signed, but the political decision has been approved, and that's a great step forward. And third, yesterday, we placed our Eurobonds at a record beneficial for Ukraine terms. That means that in our country, people believe our country. That's the credit of trust. It's not about money. I thank you so much for being with us here, for being with Ukraine. Together, we will succeed. Thank you for this opportunity provided to me to speak. Thank you.
Let me begin by getting some perspectives from the floor. Carl Bildt, former Prime Minister of Sweden. Do you have a question you might pose?
Prime Minister, lots of good news, and among the good news, to the surprise of a lot of people, including myself, was the fact that there was a gas transit agreement with Gazprom with the Russians. And there was also sorting out the Gazprom Naftogaz thing. Surprising, but good. But that's a 5-year perspective on that. What's your perspective after those 5 years? Nord Stream 2 will probably be there. How does it affect you? How do you see it in the longer perspective?
Це дуже непросте питання, і я не
That is not a simple question. I don't want that I would like to open all my cards to tell about what we are planning. I can tell you that together with our colleagues from Naftogaz, we are discussing these things a lot. And every opportunity which will we think to be realistic, we will use it. What we will definitely do in this direction will be making our economy more energy efficient. Strategic direction for the next 5 years for our country is to become stronger inside, to become more efficient, and especially when it comes to energy sector. We consume too much. We lose too much. The level of losses in some Ukrainian municipalities is more than 50%. That means that we are heating the space. We have no right in this situation to heat the space. I can give you many more facts like that, but the energy efficiency is my first reply. The second one is diversification. We shouldn't depend on one country, whatever country it is. Third, we need to look for the opportunities to increase the production of our own resources, natural resources. We're a very rich country, but we have to invest into geological exploration, into technologies, to have the chance to mine and explore and export gas, but not to require import. These are main things. I believe they're probably too general, but I will repeat it. I wouldn't like to go deep into details now. We are thinking about that in details at the professional level together with our colleagues.
Rubenstein, one of the founders of Carlyle, one of the largest private equity companies in the world. I wonder what your perspective is on this as an investor, as a businessman. Can somebody get us a mic?
When you invest in an emerging market country, you always want stability. And it was rumored recently that you were thinking of resigning as prime minister. So can you tell us, is there any truth to the rumors that you are stepping down and doing something else, maybe running for president of the United States in the Democratic primary or something like that? But if that's not what you're going to do, are you planning to stay as prime minister?
Дякую за хороше питання.
Thank you for a very good question. Next 5 years, Ukraine will be stable because we have the president who is an honest and decent person with a high trust from the society. The presidential team, I'm sure, in any case, will be working according to the course which has been started. That's European integration, openness to the world, fighting corruption, simplification of procedures. The government will be working together with the president, together with this parliament, till there is trust to the government. I'm convinced that inside the team, everything's wonderful. We have very cool coordination between ourselves. And I have no doubts that this approach to work will be preserved for the next years. To forecast something, I wouldn't do that. Besides saying that the next 5 years, Ukraine will be changing fast, and these changes will be in the right direction.
I have to confess, as a journalist, I will have to follow up then. You are not committing that you are going to stay in office.
Дивіться, я не хочу...
Just look, I don't want to disseminate the rumors. The government is not leaving. The government is planning to continue working. We're not planning any resignations. These are rumors. There are so many provocations, manipulations around the government, this dirty game, and that's done by the groups of influence who feel not comfortable to work in the country with the honest government. We will stay as long as the trust inside the team will allow us. Now, we have no problem with the trust. Is that a clear answer?
I think, to be honest, it would be even clearer if you would say not the government, but I will stay on. You see, I can read between the lines.
Можу так і сказати.
I can say so. I'm not planning to go anywhere. We have wonderful relations inside the team with the president. We have great interaction with all the highest authorities. And that's true.
An auction, I would now tell David Rubenstein he has committed to invest $1 billion in Ukraine right now, but I'm not running an auction. Let me ask you, Prime Minister, over the last year, you have seen protests in country after country, from Chile to Lebanon to Iraq to, of course, places like Hong Kong. In many of these places, not all, but in many of these places, the key issue was corruption. So Ukraine is not facing an unusual thing. Everywhere, I think people are frustrated where they see this extraordinary corruption. I was speaking to the president of Iraq yesterday. Iraq is the 5th largest petroleum reserves in the world, and it is a poor country when you go there. The roads are in terrible shape. There's no infrastructure, and people wonder, where is the money, you know? Do you have a sense as to how to tackle what is many people regard as, you know, the #1 problem in Ukraine? How will you do it differently? Why will your policy work where previous efforts have not? I will be honest with you, President Poroshenko sat in the chair that you're sitting in and said, we're doing everything to deal with corruption. And for whatever reason, it didn't happen.
Corruption is a systemic phenomenon. There are no simple solutions to that. At the highest level, I believe that we can overcome corruption if we elect right people with right values who have internal strength to oppose these temptations. Definitely, I don't know any other option. We just need to find right, honest, professional people. We need to create opportunities for them to change Ukraine, the world around them, and to protect them, because they will be beaten. And that's what we are doing now. Talking about corruption in general as a phenomenon, we need to remove the pretexts for it. We need to simplify procedures, digitalize all the processes, remove some stupid documents, create competitive markets, reduce the role of the state in the economy. That's what we are doing. In practice, we are doing it, and within the last 6 months, we have achieved unprecedented progress. If you look at the real results of work, then you will understand that my words, they are true. Now, inside the country, as far as I know, and what I hear from my friends, what I read, what journalists write, there's no doubt that at the highest level there's no corruption. But this is not enough. We understand it. We need partners, strong partners. We need investments. We need new jobs for our people, because unfortunately, more than 10 million people, 10 million Ukrainians still live below the poverty line. And while we have such poor population, so many people who have to think about how to survive, we will have big preconditions for corruption. To talk about systemic things, we need to increase the level of life, of the standard of life of the society. I will not talk about political culture, about educating the class of highly professional civil servants. What we are doing now, we're trying to remove what could be removed in a very short perspective. And now this is something that you can notice. As fast as we can remove the state from the competitive markets, the corruption will leave it and the investor will go there. And that is what we are doing in our work.
Perspective again now from two people in the audience who we are lucky to have. One is Mr. Yaroslavsky, who is one of Ukraine's biggest businessmen. And then I thought Lakshmi Mittal, who is the largest steel tycoon in the world, is also here. And so perhaps, Mr. Yaroslavsky, we can hear from you first, and then from Mr. Mittal. Can we get a mic?
Good morning, friends. Thanks to Victor Pinchuk.
Been present at all Ukrainian lunches and breakfasts. Thank you very much, Mr. Pinchuk. This Davos is different from all of the previous ones in that it has got a different energy. It has got a very specific pulse of life, which resonates with the pulse of life of the entire world. The situation in Ukraine has changed, and I can experience it. We've tried for many years, and I'll be speaking about my own business. We've tried several years to start building an airport in the city of Dnipro. Of course, I would like to have an airport in Donetsk as well, but I'm speaking about Dnipro. Thanks to the new team in power, we've launched this large infrastructure construction, and I hope that this is just the beginning. I've got a very simple question to ask of you. I've heard that you will be supporting international investors. You will be providing them with nannies. What about the local investors? Will we have any nannies in Ukraine? Will you be as tender and as kind to national investors as to the foreign ones?
Thank you for your question. I've mentioned that in my speech. Definitely, for those people who invest in Ukraine, the attitude should be just to those who we would like to attract. And this investment nanny is a marketing tool to attract attention. I'm sure that the essence of this approach is understood by you. We want every person who invests into the economy, into our country, we would like them to have a direct contact with the government. If they have some problems, local problems, again, I would like to say we can change the heads of central bodies. We can work on change of procedures, but to guarantee that in every region, at every position, there will be an honest civil servant who will be quite quickly cooperating with business. For that, what do we need? For that, we need time. And not to waste this time, we request you, if you are ready to invest, if you are ready to develop our country, please, you have this opportunity to have a specific individual management in the government who will hear you, who will be taking care of your investments. Our task is not manually to resolve and address your issues, but to get a signal from you where the system has some drawbacks. That is our approach, which we are implementing.
Lakshmi Mittal, I wonder what your experience has been.
Thank you. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Morning.
It's true that we are the largest foreign investor in Ukraine since 2004. And I've seen several governments coming in and going out. I must say that in such a short stay of this new government, I'm very impressed with the President Zelensky and Prime Minister. I have several meetings with them, and every time you impress us more and more. So I wish you really all the best. In the meantime, I would like you to inform this audience who are very keen to invest in Ukraine that what are the different reforms you are planning to launch, like labor reform or the economic reforms, investment reforms. It will be a good idea to let everyone know about the different reforms. They are very important. And I truly agree that corruption at the highest level is not there in this country. We hear a lot of corruptions, but they are at a much lower level. And I hope that you continue to eradicate corruption at all levels. And you will treat us like a partner, not only as an investor. Because without our partnership, investments never succeed. Thank you.
I believe that this governmental state policy and business, it's all about people. It's about how to make life better. And from this point of view, the authorities in business organically have to be partners. Yes, in every specific case, there's a specific instrument, but we consider any business as partners. That's true. We have a very ambitious agenda. More than that, definitely many give us advice not to do everything at the same time, do it step by step. There's a certain sense to it, but we have a very ambitious team, a very ambitious president leader, and he demands changes to happen tomorrow. And that is why all possible reforms we start almost simultaneously. We have announced most of them. We have repaired the PPP, and we have the first results, privatization, canceling some unneeded regulations, demonopolization. This year we will be implementing very difficult reforms, complicated reforms in the sphere of medical care. People will feel it, but on the other hand, this will allow for the first time serious private capital to enter medical sector, because the state will be paying for the service which some private or state institutions provides for people, changing the logic of financing of medical system. Not everyone likes it, but we are ready for these even non-popular decisions. We need to review our system of taxation. We understand it. We need to simplify it to make it more fair. For spring, we are preparing very serious changes in tax legislation. We'll be reducing and simplifying, but it's too early to talk about this architecture. We'll present it later. We need to continue currency liberalization, because borders for capital, that's bad, they harm. We need to simplify the conditions for employment, because in Ukraine, that's my favorite joke, but I will repeat, it's sometimes easier to divorce in Ukraine than sack a person from work. And that's certain disproportion which shouldn't be there. We need to build a system where people will be able to come to agreement, to agree between themselves without the state forcing them, and will be using the state as an arbitrator. And we are approaching that, and we are preserving the course towards European integration. We'll be trying to synchronize our rules and regulations with our European colleagues. We definitely have strategic projects till 2023. We are planning, just like it was envisaged, to get our energy system united with European, to become part of digital single market, to agree about the rules of roaming. I can enumerate many things which are in our agenda. But what I would like to say about the existing team and the existing government, we came so that Ukraine changes forever. and it is changing, and it is impossible not to notice it. Maybe we are making mistakes, maybe we're making certain things not too fast, but we definitely started moving quite quickly, and we will not deviate on this road. Business and investor is our reliable partner, and we are ready to go with them. Thank you for being in Ukraine, for creating jobs, for paying taxes and producing. We are your reliable partner.
On that note, Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much.
Дякую вам, друзі.
Thank you, friends.
Let me ask our terrific panel to come on stage now. David Rubenstein, Bill Ford, the CEO of General Atlantic, another great private equity company. Jared Cohen, who runs Google's geopolitical arm, Jigsaw, which he founded. Robert Shiller, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, and Professor Lychek. I think that we are going to begin, however, with we're going to begin by getting Oleg Sentsov, who is a filmmaker who was jailed by the Kremlin, to give us just a brief reflection, comment on what he thought of his experience and what he has come to think of it after coming out. Mr. Sentsov.
Hello, everybody. I will speak Ukrainian because my English is not perfect. Моя українська теж не скала.
My Ukrainian is not perfect either, but I need to start one day. Why not today? Our country, Ukraine, is not perfect either. We have big problems. We are post-Soviet state. Mr. Prime Minister mentioned that. Corruption at all the levels. Also, old public administration and poor people. But our choice, our attempts to become part of European Union, to live according to European principles, to live at the level of Europe, this has been done 6 years ago. We made this choice, and we will never step away of this road, and you have to be sure in that. We have independent democratic elections, and the latest change of power demonstrated that to the whole world. For 6 years, we've been fighting against our enemy, Putin, and Russian aggression. Everyone knows that, but within 6 years, we have not given up, and he will never defeat us. Once we manage to do that, we will do other things. We will implement our reforms, we will become Ukraine that we want to be. Glory to Ukraine.
Let me keep on that theme for a second by moving to Miroslav Lajčák, the foreign minister of Slovakia, and wonder, what do you think what is the solution to the security problem that Ukraine finds itself in? Because Ukraine is in this extraordinary position of having to do deep internal reform while facing an external threat simultaneously.
Well, we must not forget that unfortunately, Ukraine is the only country on the European continent where there is a real war. People are dying. Part of the Ukrainian territory is under occupation. And it's going on for a 6th year, but we must not get used to it. And that's why I, in my capacity as the foreign minister of Slovakia and the whole last year as the president of or chairperson in office of the OSCE, have made sure that Ukraine was on the agenda of all relevant international bodies. And I have to say that with the arrival of President Zelensky and his team, the situation has changed. He made basically two major promises during his campaign. One of them was to curb corruption, and the other one to stop the war. And he showed that he is serious about it, and he has made steps that were declared before, agreed but never executed. Confidence-building measures, exchange of prisoners, ceasefire, agreement on the Steinmeier's formula, which is the way how to implement the Minsk agreements. All this seemed impossible a year ago, and it's a reality now. So we must not stop. The way forward is the implementation of Minsk agreements. This is the only platform we have. This is the only program we have. We had a meeting of the Normandy 4 in December. Leaders agreed on a couple of steps, but right now I don't see the atmosphere of continuation. Somehow the situation is ambiguous again. We must not allow that there will be different interpretation of what has been agreed. We need Ukrainian government to have a full control over its territory, full access to every part of the country, full control over the Ukrainian-Russian border, and we have to make sure that the local elections in Ukraine will be conducted under the Ukrainian law with full transparency, free and fair, meeting the European standards. And this is what the international community must make sure. This is the moment when the international community must throw its full support behind Ukraine.
Will Europe maintain the sanctions on Russia?
Yes.
Jared Cohen, you have a unique perspective in that you are able to see what the Russians are doing that is not visible to most of us. What is the nature of Russia's hybrid war, particularly in the cyber realm, and what lessons can you draw from it? Because presumably what Russia is trying out in Ukraine are tactics it might then use in other places, including, quite frankly, elections in Western countries.
Thank you, Fareed, and Victor, thank you. It's always an honor and a privilege to be with you all. Yeah, look, I think it's an important question, and to me, for the work that I do, there's no country that's more important than Ukraine. For the precise reason that you allude to, Fareed, Ukraine has become a hub of innovation for nefarious cyber activity from Ukraine's neighbor. So if you want to anticipate, how might Russia meddle in the 2020 presidential election, you look at where things are tried out first and worse. And so to take Miroslav's point, if there's an active military theater in eastern Ukraine, you have to assume that that's where the most advanced experimentation will take place. And so to me, Ukraine offers a crystal ball for what's to come on disinformation. Now, from my perspective, Ukraine is kind of ground zero for innovation in this space in terms of how we respond. Ukraine has, in my opinion, one of the most robust civil societies. It's a throwback to the best days of civil society. You have world-class software engineers, and differently than just about any other country in the world except for Israel, you live in a geopolitical context where the engineers don't need help understanding the nature of these threats. And so when I look at Ukraine, yes, it's easy to identify the hybrid warfare, and yes, it's easy to look at all the nefarious cyber activity, but I want to sort of make the point of optimism that I think Ukrainians are well positioned to respond to this. The responsibility, is on the rest of us to find ways to invest in those capabilities. The next great company for cybersecurity and for fighting disinformation should come out of Ukraine, and we need to do our part to help foster that.
So that's the security piece. Now we have the issue of growth. Robert Shiller, economists actually are still a little puzzled as to what exactly causes self-sustaining growth. I remember one of your predecessors, Robert North, said, at the end of the day, it seemed as though good, functioning, clean political institutions seemed to be the distinguishing feature, beginning with the Dutch and the English. What do you think it is when you look at a country like Ukraine? What is the advice you would give them and their government? What do they need to do to try to create that virtuous cycle of self-sustaining growth?
I think that the Ukrainian government has to work to promote what I would call sustainable optimism. it has to be something that people really believe in. And I think the educational system in Ukraine has to present something that is contagious. It has to present the truth. The corruption that you talk about is substantially driven, I think, by a culture of corruption, a sense that this is what history is like, a sense of inevitability of corrupt activities. It has to be that presenting history has to revise that notion to seal in this optimism that we now see in Ukraine as something sustainable. The risk, of course, is that you might have a boom for a while and then some scandal, some event takes the luster off of that. And so we don't look at the latest growth numbers as an indication of success, but we have to look at how the culture is changing.
Bill Ford, when you look at investments, you know, one of the features that I think countries don't realize is that they may be getting a little bit better than they were, but for an investor, for a foreign investor, you're being compared against the other best performing countries. So you don't have to just do better than you did last year, but you have to be doing better than Thailand or South Korea or whatever it is. From your perspective, what can Ukraine do that will make it rise out of the bunch and make foreign investors like you eager to invest in it?
Thank you, Fareed, and thank you, Victor, once again for having me here. I think it's a great question, Fareed, but I think a lot of the answers have been stated already, starting with the Prime Minister. Corruption is problem number one. Capital is not going to flow into a country if there's a significant risk of corruption. Our Foreign Corrupt Practices Act limit that and expose us to significant liability. So corruption would be the first thing, and it's been talked about. I think Jared's also right that Ukraine has a great starting point with real civil society that can be built upon. But that leads to what I think is the key ingredient where we've seen success, which is around talent. And Ukraine is blessed with a very strong educational system, very strong engineering talent, but that talent has to believe in the opportunity and then return to Ukraine in many cases and be willing to build businesses there. And in countries now like India, Brazil, Indonesia, where we're active, we're seeing young people coming back and being tech entrepreneurs and building new digital businesses. And what I'm hopeful for Ukraine is that we're going to see a generation of young people who can build the next set of digital businesses, but in the Ukraine. And while I think privatization is exciting, I think the thing that will really create enthusiasm for the country and confidence is some of these younger entrepreneurs build real businesses and have real success in growing technology companies and digital companies.
I know that the point you made was echoed by Robert Smith, the CEO of Vista, which is probably the best tech investment shop there is, and he says, the only thing I need is a good education system that educates human talent. The rest I can handle, but the one thing the country has to give me is that end product.
If I could add, Fareed, and just the talent staying in the country. Right. Because if you produce great talent and the talent leaves to pursue their dreams elsewhere, it's not going to lift up Ukraine.
Right. If you look at Russia, had a huge amount of great technical talent.
Exactly.
All of it went to Israel, which is why Israel has this great tech boom going on. No, that's one of the reasons. David Rubenstein, I want to ask you to reflect a little bit, not just on the economic challenge here, but the political challenge of building a real democracy. One of the things you have spent a lot of time in the last 10 years doing is spending enormous amounts of your money to remind Americans of their democratic tradition. You've paid money to renovate the Washington Monument, bought various documents, Constitution, Emancipation Proclamation, and you do that all, you've told me, because you want Americans to remember their democratic heritage. So what does Ukraine do to build a democratic heritage?
Okay, well, thank you very much, and I appreciate Victor inviting me to be here. And I'm interested in Ukraine, in part because my ancestors left Ukraine about 100 plus years ago, in part because there was no private equity in investment opportunities in Ukraine at the time. Had there been some, they would have stayed, and I'd probably be Ukrainian right now. And when I was in Ukraine about a year ago at the conference that Victor organized, I did get a chance to meet with the president of Ukraine, and we're talking about meeting with the president. I said, there's no problem. I'm sure the president will be happy to meet with you. I didn't realize what was going on. My advice probably wasn't that accurate, but in any event, eventually, I'm sure that problem will be taken care of. I'll answer your question in 1 second. The question about corruption is important, and let me explain. People who invest in emerging markets, what they're looking for is a higher rate of return than they can get in developed markets. You can always invest your money in the United States, a very developed market, and get a reasonably good rate of return, but you're going to have rule of law, transparency, quality of managers, reasonable exit opportunities, and so forth. But people invest outside of developed markets because the theory is you'll get a higher rate of return. The prices will be lower, the population is growing, the government has more incentive to make it possible for you to invest, and also, in the end, emerging market rates of return can be theoretically higher. And that's why there has been a boom in emerging market investments over the last 25 years or so. I should say the greatest emerging market investment of all time country was the United States. We were an emerging market many, many years ago. In the last 50 years or so, China and India have led the way to being emerging markets. Ukraine is obviously smaller than China and India. It has appeal, but the problem with corruption is not so much the corruption, it's the perception of corruption. Many investors who want to invest in emerging markets because they think they're going to get higher rates of return, they don't want to be criticized because if they make high rates of return, then there's a perception that there's a corruption in the place. People will think you did something wrong, even if you didn't do anything wrong. So I think Ukraine needs to work on the image as well as the reality. To answer your question, democracy is not something that flourishes overnight. It takes many years to build it, and I think Ukraine has a way to go. But I do think the new government is interested in attracting foreign capital and getting rid of the perception of corruption as well as the reality of it. And I think to the extent that more Western investors can be attracted there and learn about the traditions of Ukraine, I think it would be a plus. But in the end, it's not only the reality, it's the perception. And I think some of the recent events of the last year or so have set that back. But emerging market investors are, again, relatively interested in trying markets that have been difficult in the last 5 or 10 years because the bloom on the was off the rose on emerging markets investments in the last 5 years or so, but it's coming back now, and I think more and more money from the developed markets will go into the emerging markets, particularly in countries where it isn't perceived that there's a corruption issue.
So in terms of the investment climate, one factor that will inevitably be very important is the overriding question of what is happening in global markets. Where are we right now? And we do have the extraordinary opportunity here to hear from Robert Shiller. There are very few economists I know who have actually ever predicted a market crash. There is only one living economist I know who predicted 2 market crashes. But Robert Shiller predicted almost precisely the technology market bubble and crash in 99, 2000, and then the housing market crash in 2007 and 8. So, Bob, you must hate this because you're always put on the spot. Are we at a market peak? Third time lucky?
I hate to press my luck and make a dramatic forecast. The problem is that it's hard to predict the exact timing of these things. But you can look at levels of markets. And in the United States, we have the most expensive stock market in the world based on the CAPE ratio, cyclically adjusted price-earnings ratio that I've been advocating. But it's not just the stock market, it's also the housing market. The boom we've seen in housing since 2012 is not record-setting, it's the 3rd biggest boom after the 1997-2006 boom and the 1934 to 51 boom. So, but it's big. And we also see a bond market. Well, it's not just in the US, we see overpricing there. So it looks like we're in a situation which is not going to continue a whole lot longer, but that's all I can say.
All right. Well, that is that could turn out to be good news for Ukraine. If markets go down in one place, they can go up in another. But let me ask Bill Ford, when you find yourself in these markets, you need exit opportunities. You need to find ways to get capital. What can the government do to make that piece of it? We've spent a lot of time talking about the entry. What can it do to make it easier for people to take their capital out so that they can then reinvest?
Well, I think what we've seen in many emerging markets is a real commitment to develop a local capital market by having either the local stock exchange or develop rule sets that allow for the easy flow of capital into the country, and as Fareed is saying, capital that can be monetized and then get out of the country. And I think policies that facilitate that will be a plus for attracting capital. But I just want to return, Fareed, if I could. Generally speaking, high-quality growth companies can find a capital market for exit in the world because investors are interested in growth, are interested in entrepreneurs. And so I think the real challenge does return to the fact is, can we get local entrepreneurs to build high-quality businesses and then attract talent behind them and then have successful IPOs or exits, hopefully in Ukraine, but even beyond Ukraine?
Let me close because we don't have a lot of time. Let me ask Jared to get, Jared Cohen, you were in the Donbass, and I think that for many of us who haven't been there, I want to just get your sense on the ground. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Do you just your reflections?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was one of the most extraordinary trips that I've taken. I took the train across the country, went as far out to the front lines as one could go, and to the point that you made at the beginning, you have to remind yourself that you're in Europe and this is an active military conflict in Europe, and you look out into the Donbass, and you can see the occupied territory. I think what's most interesting when you're there is talking to people who are actively involved in the conflict. When I was there, I heard about a series of hybrid warfare techniques that were totally unfamiliar to me. And in particular, one of the things that we saw and one of the things that we heard was the systematic targeting of police officers over instant messaging. With the aim being that when there was a military incursion, the police officers would defect to the other side. And so the key insight there is in an active military conflict where you have hybrid warfare, the first strike is not a kinetic strike. The first strike is a disinformation deployment. And that disinformation deployment seeks to undermine the resilience of the particular area that will subsequently be attacked. And so, Ukraine is probably the most active hybrid warfare theater in the entire world, which is certainly a vulnerability, but again, I think it's an opportunity because this is the future of warfare. I don't think we're going to ever see conflicts in the future that don't begin as cyber conflicts before they unfold in the physical realm. And so by studying Ukraine and looking at what's happening in Ukraine, we sort of foreshadow the nature of conflict in the future.
I think it's fascinating to think about how the attacks now in today's world are on the credibility of a government, on the credibility of news, on the credibility of facts. And if that, at some level, we really are now living in a digital world because that becomes the most powerful weapon you have. I want to end with the Ukrainian, and I wonder if I ask the Prime Minister if he would like to say a few words just to close, or I know we have the Minister of Finance here as well. Is Oksana here somewhere? Maybe she could say something. I think I've persuaded the Prime Minister to come up and say a few words, and then Victor, will you thank everyone?
Thank you one more time, guys. I believe that Ukraine is the best place in the world to invest right now. Why? Because not only because the opportunities of return on investment, but because we have so many great people, not only here but in Ukraine, to upgrade their lives, to upgrade their culture, their mind. And from my point of view, it's a great opportunity for all of us to be a part of this great story. We have a great opportunity and we have no any chance to lose it. We will succeed with it, and thank you that you are all already a part of this story. To be successful in Ukraine, for investor, you should know only one couple of words. Slava Ukraini! If you know the
Glory to Ukraine,
you for sure will feel in Ukraine like in home. So you can repeat it with me. Слава Україні! Героям слава! Дякую вам за те, що ви разом тут з нами.
thank you for being with us.
Thank you all, and we thank Victor in particular, who has, for those of you who don't know, there is a very active Ukraine House with activities with parliamentary delegations, all toward the goal of helping Ukraine succeed in these extraordinary times. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Victor.
Thank you.